Well, hello, welcome to Round the Table Live with Christian Concern. It's great to be here and have you watching and listening. And today we're talking about, is Christianity being chucked out of public life? And you'll have seen, I expect all of you, what's happened with Kate Forbes as she contends to be the new leader of the SNP, and all of the flack and discussion that's happened around that. And I'm delighted to welcome today Colin Wilson, live from Scotland. Colin, lovely to have you with us. Are you in Inverness, is it? Where are you exactly?
Well, it's just north of Inverness, yeah.
Just north of Inverness, yeah. Colin was one of the lead petitioners in the case we did against the Scottish Government in the lockdown about Scottish Government continuing to enforce closure of churches, which we won, and defeated the Scottish Government in that. And Colin, I'll get you to introduce yourself a little bit more in a minute, but also great to be joined by Joe Boot, who is founder of the Ezra Institute for Contemporary Christianity, long-standing faculty member of the Wilberforce Academy for us here at Christian Concern as well. And now he's back in England, having been in Canada for some time, and in his new study over there in Ware, it is, isn't it, Joe?
Not far from Ware, yeah.
Yes. Great to have you on as well. Colin, tell us a little bit about your own role and your own ministry and what you make of the whole furore that's happened since Nicola Sturgeon resigned as leader of the Scottish Nationalist Party.
Well, I mean, I've been born in Scotland, lived here all my life. Over that period, the last 30 years or so, been working full time with Christian leaders and organisations, both in Scotland and across the UK. What do I make of the way Nicola Sturgeon resigned? Well, I don't know if she had much option, really. Hoist by one's own petard is an expression which readily comes to mind. But I think she had maybe flagged up the end of her tenure recently by talking about writing her memoirs. So whether
I didn't see that, did she? All right.
Yeah, well, whether at that stage she was anticipating the end of her reign, but certainly I'm not sure if she necessarily anticipated the demise as it came about.
Yeah. And Joe, what have you made about how this whole gender self-ID thing sort of blew up in Scotland?
To some degree, I was unsure as to whether she was going to succeed with it, because Scotland has been moving very aggressively in this direction for some time, as you know.
Yeah.
And Nicola Sturgeon seems to have been able to carry people with her and sort of and crush her opposition with seeming ease in the past. But I do think it's very interesting the way in which this particular issue, the trans issue, has really run her aground on the rocks. As Colin said, she really has somehow been hung on her own gallows here. It does seem to indicate that there comes a point, even in progressive life in a secular and increasingly repaganizing West, that if you move far enough against creation order and creation norms, you are still going to run into trouble. And this issue of male prisoners in female prisons who happen to claim to be trans, I think was proved to be a bridge too far for ordinary people in Scotland, and it seems even people within her own party. So I think it was quite a difficult one to call initially, and I think for the most part Christians are obviously going to be gratified that it was a huge failure and that Nicola Sturgeon is gone. I, for one, am very glad that she's gone. I think the problem, of course, confronting us now is who is going to replace her. If we clean house with one devil, do 7 more devils come in and fill her space?
Colin, you're pleased to see Nicola go, I imagine?
Sorry?
You're pleased to see Nicola Sturgeon go?
Well, I think as Joe said, the devil you know and the devil you don't know. I mean, Sturgeon, I think, is a reflection on where society is heading generally. So what will come along to replace it? I mean, it would be very, very interesting to see how the vote actually goes. You'll probably know that the most recent poll has shown Kate Forbes taking a leading position, although if you look at much of the headlines, you wouldn't think that. But I think that there is an underlying sense in Scotland and society in general that, we have gone, as Joe said, a bridge too far. This has got to stop. And I think also that there's a view that, or a lack of trust now in politicians. And I think that, it's encouraging, certainly I do feel, and others I think too, to see a politician standing up and actually saying what they believe.
Tell us a bit more about Kate Forbes, if you can, Colin, because I understand she's your constituency MSP, and you've met her and had interactions with her over a period of time. Is that right?
Yeah, indeed. Of course, she's been on maternity leave, so I haven't seen her for quite some time. Sure. But I mean, she's a very, very able young lady, intelligent, articulate, personable. Ticks all the boxes, and I think that
she came in. Remind us, Colin, but she took over the role of treasurer with hours to go. I mean, what tell us about that?
Well, that's right. Our predecessor, the finance secretary, had to resign over inappropriate text messages to a young boy. So, she was dumped into the post with 24 hours notice to deliver a budget. Now, of course, the budget would have been prepared in advance, but nevertheless, it's quite a feat to pull off. In terms of her nationalistic credentials, she delivered an address to Parliament entirely in Gaelic. She's committed in that way. But no, I mean, she is very, very able. I mean, even in terms of a constituency MSP, her geography must be about half the size of Wales. So extremely busy. She has been extremely active and moving around the whole territory. Of course, she's got married, and now, as we know, a mother of a young child. Who knows what that impact will have, irrespective of the outcome. But no, I mean, she is very, very able.
And in all of this debate, nobody is questioning her ability or competence, are they, Colin? But what about her faith? What can you tell us about her faith from your perspective?
Well, I mean, I think she's been very robust and clear all along, which again, I think is a feature which has commended her to people. I'm sure you probably remember Tim, the leader of the Liberal Party, Tim Farron, when yes. He was eventually cornered. And of course, this is what the press do. They will sense a weakness, and they will press forward until that weakness is exposed, as it were. So I think Kate has very wisely adopted the alternative position. Here I stand. So it leaves the media and others' enemies nowhere to go, really.
Yeah.
Whether that policy will pay off, of course, remains to be seen. But I think it's a brave posture.
Yeah. Joe, what do you make of the sort of the vitriol that there is? In fact, maybe we've got a little screenshot of an article from The Guardian that we can show here that sort of demonstrates the kind of vitriol that she's been pills is the headline about Kate spreads to waters south, and say there it is there from The Guardian just this week on Tuesday. Forbes doubles down, torpedoes SNP chances past the idiot pills. Leadership candidate managed to scale supporters' insanity spreads to waters down south. Yeah, this kind of opprobrium, this kind of abuse. What do you make of it, Joe?
Well, of course, that's what you would expect from The Guardian, at any rate, which is a very left-leaning paper, to put it mildly. But I would agree that you see a similar dismissive posture across the board. And I think that based on what we've seen in recent years with the likes of Tim Farron that Colin mentioned earlier, it's not unexpected, really, that when somebody who is in public life, who is in potentially a senior level of government, and who is clear on their Christian perspective, is the recipient of being pilloried and denounced and castigated by the media, which is odd, isn't it, in a liberal society that claims that it's interested in democracy and inclusivity, that the one opinion that isn't allowed and the one kind of leader that can't possibly be permitted is one that professes to be a Christian. I mean, if you're celebrating Diwali at 10 Downing Street and publicly professing to be a Hindu, I don't see The Guardian discussing the problem of the caste system in India and whether Rishi Sunak is going to be interested in imposing a Hindu social order on the United Kingdom. When her Kate Forbes opponent there, is it Humza Yousaf, who is a Muslim, and similar Muslim leaders and mayors in this country are not subjected to anything like this. In fact, there would be an absolute outcry if they were. And yet the Islamic position on things like marriage and abortion, though not, we need to be careful here, not identical to the Christian perspective. The Islamic view of marriage is not identical to the Christian perspective, but certainly it would take the same view of things like homosexuality and transgenderism, and would have a dim view of abortion. Where do we see these Islamic politicians being treated this way in the press, or by? And this is true even on some of the. I watched an interview with GB News the other day with one of their anchors, and Bev, I think her name is. And she was sort of saying that Kate had fallen down a rabbit hole and emerged on the other side of the world in the 18th century. Now, you know, the level of historical awareness here is incredible. I mean, the notion that basically simple, mainstream Christian perspectives that, despite even the most recent stupidity by the Church of England, are still the official teaching of the state church, that she upholds, that at least the Church of England, that she's somehow fallen down a rabbit hole and emerged in the wrong century. I mean, let's not forget that this whole thing of even a gay marriage, so-called, is in the last 10, 15 years in the West. Yeah. And that you only have to go back to the end of the 1960s to find some of these behaviors still criminal. Mm-hmm. So the notion that somebody who holds a basic, mainstream, traditional position on the value of unborn life in the womb and believes that marriage is between a man and a woman somehow puts them beyond the pale politically, I do think is a remarkable indicator of where we are now. And I don't think it's unique to Scotland. I mean, I do think that Westminster's opposition to Nicola Sturgeon's trans bill does indicate that England is still more conservative at the present time than Scotland, although it will be very interesting, as Colin said, to see how does this vote eventually go. But the fact that Westminster put a brake on this suggests there are forces arrayed in England at the moment that perhaps are not quite as strong in Scotland. And I would hasten to add that, you know, from a purely Christian standpoint, when I analyze Kate Forbes's politics, I don't share all of her opinions. I think she's a social democrat, left-leaning in her economic policy for sure. I think some of her climate policies bear serious scrutiny. But it seems that you can be on board with... And
to be clear, I don't think, Joe, you'd support Scottish nationalism either, would you? I don't think Colin would either. Is that right?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, obviously, Colin can speak to that. I don't support her desire to break up the oldest union in Europe. I think it would be a big mistake for Scotland and a mistake for the Scottish people. But So it's not about saying, well, everything Kate says is fine just because she's a Christian. Not at all.
No. Yeah.
We have to, look at the Christian world and life view and say, well, where actually do her policies fall short of what we would traditionally think of, or at least work out as a distinctly Christian perspective politically? I think she falls short in a number of areas. But the fact that she makes a personal profession of faith and holds two of the most basic, fundamental, widely shared beliefs that the Western world has held for centuries puts her beyond the pale with the media is astonishing, really.
Yeah. So, and Colin, and by the way, if you're watching live, we can see your comments on YouTube and Facebook. So do ask questions live if you want to about all this to Colin or Joe. But Colin, you mentioned earlier a poll, and I think we've got a screenshot of a recent poll showing remarkable support for Kate Forbes, actually, and which is not what you'd sort of think of from the media portrayal. She's sunk her boat and all this kind of stuff, and like Joe said, fall into a rabbit hole, etc. From the media portrayal. But the ordinary person in Scotland, can we get that poll up, is actually quite liking Kate Forbes. And is that your perception? I mean, there we are, we've got it there. So the don't knows are the largest group at 30%, but Kate Forbes is the leading person, 28% support, and Hamza Yusuf only 20% support, and then other people are much lower than that. So whereas the media is portraying it as she's completely sunk her campaign, it's terrible, in actual fact, she's the front runner. Is that your perception as well, Colin, that she could win this in the end?
Well, I think so. There's the old adage that we shouldn't believe in journalists, but we believe everything they say. But and of course, the media, generally speaking, has been very liberal over the past couple of decades. And the BBC, to be honest, I read a book called The Noble Liar, written by a former BBC employee. So the media, generally speaking, have got their guns out for anything, as Joe said, that is at all Christian. And that's the indigenous religion, the historic religion in the British Isles. And I think that's partly why it's perceived as such a threat, apart from the very important issues that we're now looking at. I should quickly say, as Joe said, Kate's policies, I wouldn't agree with all of them. I don't necessarily know all of them in detail, but I have to say this: I'm a unionist. I believe that there's no logical end to regional fracturing. In fact, about 2013, I think it was, the Big Issue magazine carried a front piece on the cover page showing Shetland hiving off to Norway. Scotland is not a homogeneous, demographic area. And it's very much, I suppose, akin to how perhaps north of England might view Westminster. Where I am, where Kate is very much how we would view the Central Belt, where the bulk of the population resides. So even if Scotland were to become independent, I don't think that's the end of the story. But as I say, I'm committed to the Union. I do believe that. As it says in Scripture, God's determined the boundaries of their habitation, and we can clearly see that by looking at the map.
Yeah, and so, but do you think that Kate could win this if it goes to debate? She's very, very. You've emphasised how capable she is. She could win Hamza Yusuf in a debate, could she not?
You mean win a debate, or actually win the election?
Well, both. Yeah, both. Yeah. Both.
Well, as I said, in debating terms, I mean, she is very, very good. So for that matter, has Sturgeon been. And in fact, from the retiral of the former Conservative leader, Ruth Davidson, there really hasn't been a match for Sturgeon in the Scottish Parliament. So, she can certainly at a personal level hold her own. But as I said earlier, I think that, and that poll may be, an accurate reflection, there is a gut sense that there is something wrong in our society. And also, as I mentioned earlier, to see a politician stating clearly where they stand is very, very refreshing to most people.
That's right. She could have hidden it. She could have lied about it. She could have obfuscated or something. But she's just been straight up. And I think actually the ordinary people in the public respect her openness and honesty and integrity. And this is what I think. Kind of, take me for what I am. This is who I am. Kind of thing. Do you think, Joe, that things have got worse since Tim Farron? Tim Farron resigned as leader of the Lib Dem Party in 2017, I think it was, after facing exactly this kind of pressure. But he, to be fair, as well, he did actually originally try and dodge it or change his, claim he didn't think that homosexuality was a sin, and then repented and said it was and resigned as leader of the Lib Dem Party. And in his resignation statement said that there's no place for Christians anymore to lead a party in the UK. Might Kate Forbes change that, and we see an improvement on this?
Well, I think the situation is very interesting, and it doesn't surprise me that a popular poll right now has Kate Forbes in the lead, because I do think that the disillusionment that Colin alluded to with contemporary politics and with politicians in general is very, very great, and it's serious. I think we're almost on the verge of a crisis point of disillusionment with political life in the UK. And I think that where somebody speaks clearly and states things clearly and is unashamed and doesn't cave and bow and scrape to elite opinion and to the media, people have a lot of respect for that. I mean, who would have thought that, with all the, fudging and messing around with Brexit that happened, that when that whole issue was before the British public, the media and the elites, and that they were all saying it was going to go the other way. But popular opinion of ordinary people was simply not being reflected amongst the politicians and amongst cultural elites and in the media. And it may well be the same here. I mean, wouldn't it be a remarkable thing and a very encouraging thing if an overtly and openly Christian politician who refuses to bow and scrape to progressive opinion and repent and recant and apologize for most basic fundamental values were to be elected? It was interesting you mentioned Tim Farron, because I saw him in an interview a couple of days ago, because he's been asked about what's happening with Kate Forbes. And at the time, I remember after that whole thing happened, I wrote an article, I think Christian Concern actually published it, about the fact that how disappointed I was that Tim Farron had not been adequately prepared by Christians, by Christian leaders, to make his defense in the public space and to argue his case and not to cave and repent and recant. And in this interview, he actually started talking openly about the fact that there's no neutrality, and everybody, whoever you are, is committed to a particular world and life view. And that world and life view is going to be brought into the public. Now, I think that is stuff that's happened since, that in his thinking, that's happened since, because that was not the way he was speaking and arguing before. So I think probably from an elite point of view and from a political point of view, things probably have gotten worse since Tim Farron's resignation. And I think probably people in some respects who are vociferously opposed to any sort of Christian presence in public life were encouraged by and emboldened by Tim Farron's resignation, because this would have indicated to them, yes, Christians have no place in public life. They should resign if they hold these kinds of views. But if you look at the United States, if you look at Italy, you look at, we can call it populism or whatever you want to call it. We're not necessarily going to say it's faithful biblical Christianity, but increasingly people are responding to those who state their views clearly, often common sense opinion, and are willing to stand by them. And that will often get people a great deal of support. So although the situation may be worse politically now than it was even when Tim Farron resigned, I think popular and public opinion, as we've seen on the whole trans debate in Scotland, we may have reached a bit of a tipping point with it. We shall see.
Yeah, very good. I can see some questions there about when her child was born. Her daughter was born in July, I think. So that's a good 6 months, 7 months ago now. Question here from Carol Donaldson. Can genuine Christians survive in the political arena? The pressure to compromise is constant. Gravity tends to pull us down to their level rather than raising us around those upwards. Colin, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I mean, as Joe pointed out, Tim Farron, caved in, and I think Kate is made of, as I said earlier, strong stuff. Perhaps her vulnerability is married fairly recently, first child, even more recent. That may be difficult for her, but I think, as she has illustrated, she is perfectly capable of standing up to the pressures that we're now seeing manifest. And having, nailed her colours to the mast, I think she has been articulating what we should have been hearing, actually, from church leaders, right across the board. So I think that even within the Christian community, I think generally within the wider community, as I said earlier, there's an appreciation for someone who will say this is what I believe, here is where I stand, and within the Christian community, certainly, irrespective of one's politics, there is a real prayer base, praying for her, recognizing the assault on her person, recognizing the assault on our Christian faith. I mean, what we are seeing here in Scotland is a deeply spiritual battle being waged in a political arena.
Mm-hmm.
And as Tim said, maybe we have reached a tipping point in society where society generally is saying enough, no further. We need to claw back, and it is a great shame that the churches, I'm speaking very generally here, but we know what's happened most recently in the Church of England, and the Church of Scotland has actually preceded them in that regard. Church leaders, there are some exceptions to this, but in the main, the traditional churches are actually, what should I say, positing a totally unbiblical view. So which makes Kate's stance all the more refreshing.
Are you seeing? Well, I've got two questions for you, Colin. One is perhaps you can give a bit of background explanation about her donation, the Free Church of Scotland, and the other is are Christians speaking out in support of her and backing her? Is she getting support from the church and the reaction of Christians generally to what's happening?
Oh, I mean, I think committed Christians are praying for her. Yes, very honestly, irrespective, as I say, of their politics. But just for your viewers, I mean, the Church of Scotland was the outworking of the Reformation back in the 16th century. The Church of Scotland, the only Presbyterian church at that point, very, very sadly, over the years, it is now fragmented. And I think there's probably about 9 denominations, but at the end of the 19th century, the Free Church of Scotland was formed on doctrinal issues, feeling that the Church of Scotland was starting to slip away. It is a denomination. The Free Church in England might be regarded as independent congregations, but it is a denomination in Scotland. Commonly called the wee Frees because of its size, but in terms of
how big is it? How many churches roughly? Do you know?
Oh my goodness, you've put me in a spot here, Tim. There's probably about 40. I'd be guessing. I would have to check. I'm talking about churches that were significant size numbers. It is, of course, as all churches are, suffering from an aging population. But it is robust doctrinally, but perhaps not as vocal as an institution as Kate has been.
Yeah. And Joe, what's your take on the role of the church in this, and what the church should be saying and doing in relation to these issues and supporting someone like Kate Forbes and so on?
Well, I think Colin makes a great point that if the church itself, especially when we think about the established churches, had made as clear a stand as this young lady, how different things could have been. It will, if she wins, it will create a bit of a crisis for unionists, because there'll be a sense of, well, here's a woman with the courage of her convictions as a Christian, but we believe in a united kingdom. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that shakes down if she's successful. But that's a long road ahead before then. But I think that the clarity and the conviction with which she is speaking represents a direct challenge to the cowardice and compromise of the church. And the church should feel appropriately humiliated and actually admonished by her public stand, that this young woman who's a new mother has got more courage and conviction than the Archbishop of Canterbury or the Church of Scotland to face some adversity and speak the truth. So in some respects, it is it's a tragedy that such people. I mean, think about the difference that could be made if publicly leaders of the mainline churches, especially the state church, would publicly make statements in support of Kate and her Christian perspective and her right to hold those views and participate in a democracy. And instead, they flap around in the background, commenting on everything else, but afraid of media blowback. So I do think it's these things represent a reprimand to the church. As far as is it possible for really a genuine Christian to be in politics? Well, let's find out. I mean, because thus far, I mean, when you look at it, how many who are Christian in name have the courage to stand up and be clear? And Tim Farron, I'm sure he regrets now what happened and the way he handled the situation. But as Colin mentioned earlier, he caved. He's the most high-profile figure. But who else are we looking at? I mean, you sort of got a quiet-ish Catholic in Jacob Rees-Mogg, but he's not outspoken on these issues. And so
Miriam Cates is good. Miriam Cates is being outspoken.
Yes, that's fair. Yeah. So, but somebody who is very much in the public eye. I mean, this is now a real test. And so there are some people in the background plugging away quietly. But we have to get to the point as believers now where we're to say, look, we're putting our careers on the altar. We're putting the paycheck on the altar. And we're willing to stand for Christ and see what God will do. Because this needs to be put to the test now. And perhaps as people begin to see a more open vilification and persecution of Christians for no other reason that they hold traditional beliefs, I think that there's a lot of ordinary average people out there who don't name the name of Christ who will be in sympathy with Christians.
There would be.
Yeah, I would hardly agree with what Jules just said. There is a sense of common public decency, and I'm using that, in a very general term, where people are saying, this can't go on. So yeah, but I mean, if she does attain the position of leadership, I mean, my goodness, if she got a battle now, it won't be over if she comes to that position. And of course, from a Scottish perspective too, there's the big beast in the jungle of the former SNP leader Alex Salmond, who is lurking there in the background. But anyway, maybe we shouldn't go into that part of the discussion.
Well, I have a personal interest in what goes on in Scotland. My mother is a Gordon. So on my mother's side of the family is Scottish by origin. And Scotland has this rich history going all the way back to John Knox of a reformed parliament and probably the greatest per capita missionary sending nation the world has ever known. To see that being squandered and sold down the river, what might happen if a few courageous people stood up and said, here and no further?
Well, absolutely, Joe. And as you said, that's Scotland's heritage from the time of the Reformation. I mean, the first thing the reformers did was create the parish system, a church and a school in every parish. So the children would receive a decent education and a biblical education. Right. How far of a following something else.
What's Colin? Just sort of conclude with this, but what is your sort of hope and prayer for Scotland at the moment? What would you be encouraging us to pray for at this point?
Well, obviously, as you said before, we need to pray for Kate Forbes, but not just Kate Forbes. The committed Christians at every level, but principally at leadership level, would rally in behind her, pray for her. And of course, it is a bit of a dilemma because, as I said earlier, I'm a unionist by instinct. But, this, just to restate, is a spiritual battle on a political playing field. So we need to, as Christians, whether in Scotland, England, UK, pray into this huge issue that Christian values would be upheld, maintained, that we would see them translate back into public life. The public arena has been largely stripped of Christian values, and I think it's that recognition that where do we stand? Where are we in all of this? We need some absolutes, and we need people we can trust. We need to find our place in the midst of it all. And that would be my prayer, that we would regain something of that robust belief system which has shaped society over centuries.
Any concluding thoughts from you, Joe?
I think that it comes down, sometimes change will come down to certain particular moments, certain watershed moments, and I think it could be a real sincere prayer of Christians that this proves to be one of waking people up. I think probably most of us as believers who've looked at politics in the West over the last few decades have thought, surely this, and it never seems to be that. But usually moments come, a watershed moment comes where a particular individual in a particular circumstance produces a certain amount of change, not by force of their personality, but just by conviction. And I would say, in Britain and at Westminster, we haven't really had a clear Christian ideological politician since Margaret Thatcher. And I don't think it's been uphill since then. I think it's been downhill. And I think more and more people are increasingly recognizing that we want public figures who aren't just about themselves and about their own agenda and about their own personal radical revolutionary perspectives, which is really what we're seeing, but are people of decency and conviction and integrity. And Christians should lead the way in that. And that should be the thing that, above all, we're known for: clarity, conviction, compassion, integrity, truthfulness, trustworthiness. And in a time when there's great disillusionment and a lack of trust and a sense of things going wrong and chaos and shifting sands all about us, surely Christians who stand on the rock that is Christ can be a rock of stability and salt and light in the political environment. So let's be in prayer that that is Kate Forbes at this time. whether or not we share her particular views on the United Kingdom or some of the particular policy issues. We need to stand with her as a confessing Christian, seeking to uphold biblical values and basic integrity in political life.
I mean, the expression that comes to my mind is from the book of Esther. And we know the story, of course, where Esther was fearful of approaching the king. Kate may have been apprehensive about stating her position as she has done. But we know the verse, who knows if you've come to royal position for such a time as this?
Yeah.
Yes, she has been a lightning rod for all these tensions that have been building up. But, let's pray that she'll prevail.
Indeed.
Well, we will definitely be praying for her and for this stance of hers to make a difference and for her to obtain respect for it. And we're encouraged to see the level of popular support for her in spite of all the media portrayal and antagonism and dismay at her views, which are nothing less than orthodox views, as Joe's very well articulated there. Thank you very much for joining us, both of you. Really good to have your perspectives. Joe, you recently wrote a book, didn't you, Ruler of Kings, about a Christian perspective on politics, which is out and available on Amazon and other places.
Yes, Ruler of Kings, Towards a Christian View of Government, and published by Wilberforce Publications. And I hope that will be of use to people as they grapple with and wrestle with what does it really mean to be a Christian in public life? What does it mean to have a Christian view of political life? Excellent.
Yeah, great. And thank you for joining us if you're watching live or recorded. Look forward to joining you again next week. And do follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and sign up for our emails as well. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Colin.
Yeah, thank you.